trying to think of how we can address these different types of inequality effectively through different interventions. And that's why it's really important for us to come together, because we have so many folks working in different sectors which can come together and really understand clearly what's happening. Housing is another issue, so access to social housing and affordable retail private rented sector as well, and work. We often forget about work because we're told we have to get back into work. And to get people back into work, they need to have work that's appropriate for them, that works around their caring responsibilities in other sort of situations, and that they can get there on the bus, hopefully, as well. So I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the things that I've heard from research. I did a large piece of work last summer in the New Forest, which is on our back doorstep, looking at the cost of living in the New Forest and focusing in on families who are earning less than $20,000 a year. And it was a mixed methods piece of research. So we went out and we spoke to people. We spoke to people that were delivering services in Citizen Device and the different food banks across the New Forest. And we spoke to people who were using those services to find out what were the things that were really causing them difficulties even before we got to our current cost of living crisis, when they still had things like the universal credit uplift. And I've added in here just some images from the news to remind us of the main themes we've got to deal with: the cost of food going up, the cost of energy, and then I'm sure Duncan and others will pick up on the issue around surplus food and food aid, because it is diminishing, and that's what we rely on predominantly in the food aid sector. And then we also spoke to social prescribers. What a fantastic resource they are, where they say very clearly, Lila has said, I look at all aspects of their lives, because it is holistic. It's not just one aspect. It's not just food or fuel or housing. It's all of these things which pile on top of each other and create difficulties for people. In the New Forest, the key things that came out are already what has been mentioned: food, transport, housing, employment, and that was it, wasn't it? Food, transport, housing, and employment. There's many other things, but again, it's pulling out these kind of details around what people are facing: the availability of affordable housing, the cost of food. So again, I'm a geographer, and I'm a health geographer with a fascination around food environments. That's what kind of food options we have. We priced out a basket of food goods across the New Forest, same 20 items, same rough 20 items, didn't matter if it was store brand or otherwise. And at the large Tesco, it was £16.27. At the small Tesco Express 5 miles away, it was £38. And I know. And I went back and double checked it as well. And we priced this out across the forest. And that was at Tesco, so we're comparing like with like as much as we can. But that shows you how important it is to have a large format store accessible. So when we talk about food access in the retail food sector, this is why it is so important. We're tracking a similar basket of goods in our current project here in Southampton, which is the diet study, looking at food aid and how it's helping people. But as part of that, we have to address the fact that actually food costs are going up. Over the last 6 months, we've seen a real jump in the cost of milk and butter on that particular basket especially. Again, we did highlight in the New Forest folks who are on less than $20,000 a year, so it's the lowest income groups, really. 78% of our survey strongly agreed they would not be able to afford regular living costs if they had an unexpected expense. That shows you how little capacity there is in terms of savings. So this is the kind of wider thing to consider. And again, it's just the fact that cost of living has increased. And again, this is back when we still had the universal credit uplift. So things are even more challenging now. There was a fantastic quote from Duncan, which is, food aid was not planned. And I think we need to remember this. We rely on food aid quite heavily to address food poverty out of necessity. There's no national policy to deal with this. So we're looking down at local interventions at local level. But food aid was never something which was intended to be here long term. It was meant to be an emergency, stopgap, crisis situation. But in fact, some people, again going back to the New Forest, are using that food bank every week for over a year, because they're fortunate enough to have a food bank which allows them to go back every week for over a year. Here in Southampton, I will not talk too much more about food aid because it's going to be the next bit of this, but I could talk all day about food aid. What we need to think about really is the relationships and how people who are working in the food aid sector could work with the state sector, the local council, to think about how we move people away from the need for that level of support to the state level support. We're also looking at how we can try and understand what is happening for people that first gets them into the necessity of food aid and then helps them to get back out most effectively. So again, we're doing that through a mixed method study across different interventions here in Southampton, so the Southampton Social Aid Food Pantry and the Southampton City Marketplace Pantry specifically, to speak with folks and find out again what's brought you here and what would make things better. And I think it's the solutions that I really want to focus on. There are so many solutions when you go and talk to people. They've got great ideas, and it's thinking of how we can translate that into action for them. We can't give everyone more money, unfortunately. That seems to be not really acceptable, but we can at least think of other ways to support them. And Things like food pantries where you release some of their very constrained budget by giving them reduced price food is one good way to start. However, surplus food is still a challenge because there's limited supply and there's increasing competition, although I hate to use that word, for what food aid is available. And again, from that first slide, there was an image about the reduction in surplus food into the system because the supermarkets are also trying to save money. And they're also trying to cut food waste, which is also admirable. So I'll tell you a little bit more about Wessex Diet briefly, but again, it's with these two different food aid partners here in Southampton. Again, the City Council as well, so Sarah Crawford, Jason Murphy, Ravita Tahim, were all really instrumental in this. And I've got a lovely quote here from someone who said, and I quote, "It's a godsend." So having that availability of affordable food, where you go and pay a smaller amount for 15 items that you choose, so very different from a food bank, is really beneficial. Another thing, so when I was asked to do this, I went, of course, initially to people that I know, Sarah Crawford, Duncan, and said, what are the things that would be really useful to highlight? And this is something else that came up. So what do academics add, besides talking a lot? We add that kind of academic rigor. So one of the things that I'm really interested in is understanding where we see risk highest. And we've devised a measure of food insecurity risk specifically, like the index of multiple deprivation, but very focused on food. And what we see here in this map is the darker areas have highest risk of food insecurity across Southampton. The black dots show you where food aid is. So you can see there's some areas where perhaps, actually you can't see it very well from that, I'm really sorry. There are some areas where there is no food aid, but there is a higher risk. And even where there is food aid, keep in mind that there's not always food aid open at the time when people can access it. So one of the things that we can add value is in terms of academics is by doing this kind of research with you collaboratively, which is the way that all of my research projects start, going down to the council, going down to the food bank and saying, what are the kind of questions we need to answer? And we're great at doing that, and we're great at getting students involved as well in internships, dissertations, to help us answer these questions. So it's understanding things like this that we can help with. What is needed where? And this kind of work has been shared with other organizations like the Saints Foundation and the Good Grub Club to think about the holiday activity funds, for example. Where are there gaps that we can be adding some provision? I'll only speak briefly about mental health because my colleague Tom, clinical psychologist, will be talking about this in more detail. But what I wanted to highlight from our research is how mental health is both a predictor and an outcome of low income. I've tried to do a little diagram there, but what was quite clear was the importance of mental health in terms of getting people back into work and how it prevented people from getting back into work. And how when people lost their job, this led to poor mental health, and then it was this kind of replicating cycle. So mental health is extraordinarily important. Isolation also came up as well, especially for young people and especially for young parents, that sense of isolation when we don't have things like family hubs or Sure Start or whatever the name of them is now. So what I wanted to really drive home is that there are really good examples of how this works well. Here in Southampton, there's the Anti-Poverty Network and the Food Aid Forum, both organizations which bring together members of local government, the different aid groups, academics as well, to think about how we can work collectively and cohesively to get some really amazing results. And again, we've already heard a little bit about that. I know that's going to be covered in the next section. In the New Forest, the consultancy project I was involved with, we again had members of the charitable sector, academics, students who are engaging with the work as well, doing the research, and the New Forest District Council. And as a result of that, we've been able to secure more funding to actually enact the recommendations. So we were able to go from asking the questions to the collaborative research, to gathering the evidence of what was happening, what was driving difficulty for people in the New Forest, and then be able to secure funding from the Trussell Trust to have someone there for 3 years to enact those recommendations. And that's why it's important we bring in all sectors to work together. Now, I'll end with a talk about what the university can offer. So I'm at the University of Southampton. They've recently convened a task force for the cost of living, focused initially especially on students and staff, as that's their priority. So the kind of things we'll be seeing there are increasing resources for the students. For example, having a reduced price breakfast at the Arlott Bar, which is there's a nice picture of it, been recently refurbished, very nice place. Reasonably priced coffee, if you can ever find reasonably priced coffee. They're also offering food vouchers to supermarkets and a commuting fund for students who are coming from the most deprived quintiles. They're also looking at opening up, well, not looking at, it is open. These catering spaces are open to anyone in the community. So they work as warm hubs as well. And it's about making people aware of what resources we have in our community, in all parts of our community. And then again, we can always add the research insights. So again, I work across disciplines. I work with a psychologist and a public health professional And that really gives us a whole rounded perspective on what we can do to understand more about what's happening, gather that evidence, and support evidence-based decisions. I did write a very short book on this. It's very cheap as well. It's kind of the way you can save money. Don't get a consultant. Buy a 13-pound book and learn how to do your own research in food insecurity specifically, because that's what I'm really passionate about. But I couldn't leave without thanking all of the people who've helped me with this, who are named here. NIHR Applied Research Collaboration funded 2 of the projects, but also the public health team, the communities team here at the council. Debbie Chase, your team has been fantastic, and you over the years as well. So thank you very much, and I will hand over now to Mary. I hope you have better luck with that than I do. I just didn't have that. Okay.
Can I just say something on there? Great, thanks very much, Diana. Amazing research, really helpful for us. And in a second, we'll pass on to Mary. I was just going to say welcome to those of you joining on the live stream as well, and particularly to the Department of Levelling Up Housing Communities for joining us. We've got a full lecture theatre here of very, very good-looking people, so great to have you here. We're going to hand over to Mary. Mary is become a good friend, and she landed in Southampton just as the pandemic was happening, wasn't it? So we're on daily calls before we really knew each other. But let's give a round of applause to Mary. Thank you.
I'm looking at that picture up there. I look like a ghost. So note to self: next time you're asked for a photo, don't send a black and white one. So I'm really pleased to be here today, and I'd just like to echo the comments that Karen made earlier. It's fantastic to see so many people here, but the reason we're here is really, really serious. So great that there's so many good brains in the room. So I'm going to do the techie bit that Councillor Kaur mentioned earlier in terms of some statistics. So there's a few slides with quite a lot of detail on them. I'm not a data analyst, so this data has been provided by our performance team, who are fantastic. So if you have any questions later on today, I may say I'll take that away and find out for you. So the headlines: Southampton actually is a pretty prosperous city, aren't we? We've got, we're ranked 10th out of 50 in the latest Good Growth Cities Index. We've got a reasonable degree of our population are educated to degree level, and we've got a huge number of higher education students who come into the city every year. But we also have huge numbers and high levels of deprivation across the city. Now, this is 2019 data. This is based on the indices of multiple deprivation that were mentioned earlier. And we see that Southampton is ranked 55th most deprived out of 317 local authorities in the country. And that 28% of our population live in 20% of the most deprived nationally. Those are not great statistics. And you can see the map shows the areas of the city that are the most deprived. They're the ones that are dark red. So we can see pockets on the east and the west of the city and pockets in the inner city. And those do represent some areas where there are high levels of private rented sector, but also high levels of social housing. Moving on, fuel poverty. Now, this is a map that is actually from 2020, so this is not current data. And I found it really interesting when I looked at this map to see where the fuel poverty data from 2020 doesn't actually massively align with the deprivation data. So as you can see, the dark pockets in the deprivation data on the previous slide in the east and the west aren't replicated on the fuel poverty data. This is very much about high levels of private rented sector accommodation in the city. It's not reflected of the current energy situation, and the number of people in fuel poverty now, 12.5% in 2020. The latest indication is that could rise to above 40% within the city, and we'll see some indications, and Councillor Corr mentioned some of the impacts of that. So I did just want to put those maps side by side. So 2-3 years ago, this is what the situation looked like in Southampton. But certainly that map on the left, in terms of fuel poverty, if we were to be able to do that, redo that now, and obviously it's a very fast-moving situation, I think that would look considerably different. Going back to unemployment and employment, and we know that employment is a massive issue in terms of getting people out of poverty, and we're working very hard in the city to help people to get jobs. This is an interesting slide because this is data that we get month on month, and this shows us the measure of unemployment. Now, that's people who are claiming universal credit, out of work benefits, so job seekers allowance, those kinds of things, and are of working age, so it's the people who are actively seeking employment. And what we saw prior to 2020 and the first national lockdown is actually the number of people claiming benefits in the city was pretty low. And that rose sharply during the pandemic. And it has been coming down, but it hasn't yet reached pre-pandemic levels. And what we know is that whilst that claimant count has decreased massively by 35%, in some areas of the city, the most deprived areas of the city, it is much less than that. So the people claiming out of work benefits in Bevis and Bargate will be much higher than some other parts of the city. And housing has been mentioned, and I've got responsibility for housing within the city, and our housing needs manager is here today, and we are seeing a massive shift here in Southampton. We have seen the homelessness approaches increase by 29%. Now that's a big number. Now we know some of that is to do with the pandemic. We know that during the pandemic, evictions were effectively banned. You know, private rented sector evictions were stopped. So some of it is coming out of the pandemic and landlords taking the opportunity to change, to stop being landlords. The other issue, though, however, is as we're seeing the cost of living issues move forward, some landlords have left the sector, but they know that they can rent their properties for more money than they've got with their current tenants. So we are seeing people reporting to us, and the numbers are going up. And the top three reasons are people being asked to leave by family and friends, domestic abuse, which is another massive issue for the city, and private rented sector tenancies coming to an end. Those numbers, I have to say, are not slowing down. So it's something that we're continually reviewing as a team. The other issue, though, is the reduction in the number of affordable private sector rented tenancies in the city is actually becoming harder and harder to source. Southampton traditionally has been one of the more affordable cities in the south of England in terms of rented accommodation. The rent levels used to be quite close, or indeed below the local housing allowance rates, but now that we are seeing a massive shift in that. And that is making it really, really difficult for people of all backgrounds to rent privately in the city. So, cost of living. Now, there's some busy slides here, and I apologise if I get it wrong. I'm sure some people will help me out. But this is inflation. And we can see over the last 10 years, inflation has bobbed up and down around the 2.5%, went very low in 2015. 2021, we all know, things started to rise, and 2022 it has gone off the scale. The cost of living crisis, as Councillor Core said, is where wage increases and cost increases don't match up. And as we know, the cost of buying stuff has gone beyond the scale of people's incomes and the rise in incomes, if indeed they are in receipt of in-work payment. Rising energy and fuel costs, the war in Ukraine, Brexit, and COVID-19 are all factors in how we've ended up in the situation that we're in. 10.1% in July was the CPI rate. And we're not expecting that to come down really, really quickly, although some of the interventions have made a dent on that, as we know. Food. So our colleague earlier talked very much about food. So here's some of the detail on food. Cost of pasta gone through the roof. If anyone can tell me why, I'll be really, really interested. It might be because we can't get wheat from Ukraine. Cost of crisps has gone up. If you're like me and you're a crispaholic, that's quite worrying. Some things have gone down, which is interesting, but overall, prices have raised considerably over the last few months. And looking at that year-on-year comparison, we're looking at 5 items increasing by more than 15%, and that again is continuing to go up. And as has already been indicated, I have to say I was massively shocked by just that one piece of information that you could buy the same 5 items in 2 different Tesco's, and it could be double the cost. I mean, that's absolutely shocking, isn't it? Shrinkflation, I think we've been seeing this for many years, haven't we? We all know that a Mars bar is not the same size as a Mars bar when it was when I was a teenager, which is probably not a bad thing. But it is continuing, and we all see that day on day. Energy price cap. Now, this slide was probably developed just before the recent announcements by government, but it was taking into account what we thought the announcements of government were going to be. So what we can see is that that price cap has still resulted in estimated increases in energy costs of more than 200% for most households. And we all have to remember the price cap, that 2,500 average cost per year, is not an actual cap. That is an average cost. And if you have a family with a disabled child, if you have a family where you've got huge caring responsibilities and you're having to have your heating on, use energy for other means, that is going to go way beyond that £2,500. So what does that mean overall? And Councillor Corrigan indicated this one. This is pulling it all together. And this isn't everything. This is just using some of the data that we've got. If we look at that 120% increase in overall in energy bills between April and October, if we look at rising inflation, if we look at wage stagflation, we are looking at approximately 16% of households in Southampton who have got a discretionary income at the end of paying all of their bills of below zero. If those households haven't got any savings, they cannot afford to eat, they cannot afford to heat their homes. 50% of households would have a discretionary income of below £125 per month. And I wonder how many of us in the room could manage on a day-to-day basis if that was our position. And there may well be many people that we know and some in the room that are in that position or could be in that position going forward. It is quite stark, and I think it's something to remember. A below zero discretionary income, what does that mean in terms of people's health and well-being? What does it mean in terms of their day-to-day feeling human, actually? It's about being a human being. Impact on households. Nationally, obviously, 80%, 87% of adults in the UK are reporting an increase in their cost of living, and it's not. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that those the lowest incomes will be the most affected. Having our local cost of living analysis and the data that's already been discussed will help us to work out how we can target our support, how we can come together and work out the best things to do that are going to have the most impact. And I think that's something that we can consider today. Is it a universal offer, or is it about creating an offer that is going to have the most impact where it's needed? And as we've already said, the evidence points towards some underlying themes: food, energy, advice and support, and I know there's going to be some discussion around that, and impact on mental health. I would add to that list the cost of housing. Housing costs are becoming a massive issue, and I think if there's an opportunity to have those discussions today, I'd welcome that. So I'm going to move into a more positive phase. So what are we doing to support our residents? And that is the website link, if anybody wants it to go on and find out what you can do as an individual to help yourself and your families. Oh, that hasn't come out very well. I'll learn for next time. So just a quick list of what government has been doing to help the whole country. So some of the things, the government initiatives, I will whiz through that. Our community and voluntary sector, who are going to be coming up next, have been doing a huge amount to support people in our city. Information, advice and guidance, the Warmth for All partnership, the food and clothing projects that we're going to hear from, our fuel and furniture assistance, particularly provided by our colleagues from Scratch, and wellbeing support. And I think we do need to think about that holistic approach to how we support people in our communities. Businesses as well. We've mentioned that businesses are critical in this, and businesses are being affected in the same way that the rest of us are in terms of costs. So we've recently launched the business advice service at the library, and we've got the Network Eagle Lab. We've got work we're doing with the Solent LEP, and businesses are volunteering, and I think that's the other thing, is the volunteering and the connection between the community and voluntary sector and business sector is also a real opportunity in the city. Councillor Call mentioned some of the stuff that the City Council is doing, and I'm going to come on to just do a little bit of a spotlight on the Household Support Fund and the Holiday Activity and Food Programme. Those are two things, they're government funded, but obviously it's the local authority that has to pull together the resources to deliver on those particular commitments. Councillor Core mentioned subsidised bus travel, but let's remember places like libraries. There's a huge amount that our libraries are doing, offering our residents at a local level. Most residents in Southampton can walk to a local library if they're able to walk. We've got digital champions in our libraries. We've got employment support and advice coming into our libraries, and our libraries will be offering that warm spaces approach that we heard of earlier. And we do have some challenges going forward. So just to reiterate, we have got some issues around finite funding. So government funding is finite. We've got issues around access to digital channels. So people who don't have access to the internet, older people, people who can't afford it, how do they access the support and advice? Cost of living impact on volunteering. I know that the community and voluntary sector during COVID really found that to be challenging, and drops in donations to food banks, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure, later. Rising energy costs and wage inflation is affecting everyone. It's affecting community and voluntary sector businesses and statutory services. And, you know, we've got buildings, we've got places that are really important to our communities, but they are becoming increasingly difficult to maintain and manage, and the cost of running those buildings. And finally, as we said earlier, and Councillor Core said, one of the biggest things we can do is to communicate what will help, and getting the right benefits at the right time, and making sure that we all take that challenge back to communicate with our the people that we work with is going to be really important. However, we do have lots of strengths and lots of opportunities. We proved, as has been said several times today, that collaboration during COVID and getting rid of some of the stuff that gets in the way really made a difference. Within a week of being here, I saw the power of this city come together, and it was phenomenal. We know that our places of worship and our faith communities have really stepped into this space over the last few years, and you know, I would just want to say thank you to Paul and many colleagues in the room who have made that happen. We have got stronger partnership working, I think. Certainly it was there before COVID, but I think it has been galvanised by COVID, and it's about maintaining that. And we have got an employment support offer for the most vulnerable people in our communities. Let's access it. And as has already been said, the response to crisis in this city is pretty phenomenal. I've been at the sharp end of working with the city on COVID, but I also work with the team on the Southampton Support Network, the Street Support Network in relation to homelessness, the work that so many communities did in supporting us with the Ukraine and the Afghan refugee situations, and now today we're here to speak about the cost of living. Just a couple of slides on some of the programmes that are running. So the Holiday Activity and Food Programme provided over 37,000 sessions of activities across the city over the period of time that it's been running. Over 60 sites, so that's schools and education and all sorts of community buildings and community organisations, with 5,000 eligible pupils accessing that support. That's 38,000 individual healthy meals to the children that access that programme. 82% of available places were used this summer. We want to make that 100% next time. And we've also seen an increase in the number of pupils who've got special education needs accessing that programme. And we know that young people with special education needs really do sometimes miss out on some of the offers that are around. So that's really important to us. We've also been administering the Household Support Fund in its various iterations over the last year or so. Between April and September, when the last iteration was running, we provided 13,500 children with support for free school meals. We provided support to 790 families for white goods and utility top-ups, and more than 4,000 self-referrals for help with food vouchers during that period. That's a phenomenal number. And we also made direct payments to more than 6,000 pensioners as one of the eligible groups within that fund. So I think it is worth knowing that, you know, we collectively bring together our might as a city, and we can use the resources that are given to us by government and by others to really help and support some of the most vulnerable communities. I have to say, yes, all of this data is available on our fantastic data observatory. So those of you data geeks, this is a tiny amount of data that is available. I could probably have stood here all day and would have been getting it wrong, I'm sure. But please do go and take a look. And thank you very much.
So we're going to move into a time when we're going to hear about some of our local responses with food banks and warm spaces initiatives. I'll probably be best if I pass this microphone to you and then you can go. First person who's going to speak is... Yeah, we'll use this one. Yeah, thank you. After you.
Thank you very much. Use the microphone, the gentleman says. What a sensible idea. It's very nice to see you. Loved that slide, Mary, of the skydivers. Feels very much like that, all clinging to one another, plummeting towards the ground. Let's hope we find our parachute as a city. I'm here just to give you some nuts and bolts about how the food aid works across the city. And are you doing my slides, Paul? Oh, yeah, great. That's all right. No, this one. No, I want this one, mate. Yeah, thank you. So some of the context of food aid in Southampton and some of the challenges we're all facing moving into the winter and then into next year. Southampton City Mission have been running food banks in Southampton for 26 years. Very grateful to Annette and Chris Davis for getting in on the ground floor and starting something so long ago, so that at this stage they're incredibly well embedded, networked and supported. Can you go back to my... I don't know what you're doing now. Yeah. Can I have my map with the dots on? Thank you. I think perhaps we might need a new techie in the front seats. I'm aware that many of you won't know exactly how the Basics Banks run across the city, despite the superb support we had from the Daily Echo over the summer. I don't know whether you caught their Boost the Bank campaign, where they ran several really good articles. Really, actually, they were really good, and their reporters came and worked for days in the Basics Banks or on the vans. It was really good reporting. So we have 5 Basics Banks across the city, all of them in areas of deprivation. They're the red dots, one for each day of the week. And the green dot is our clothes bank. We keep all the clothes in one venue because it maximises choice for people, which in turn maximises their self-respect, their autonomy, enables them to shop like it's a normal shop for getting stuff for and choose for their family 4 sets of clothes for everybody in the family that they would like. The Basics Banks work by giving out food parcels that we make up while our guests are there, and they have 4 days worth of food for everybody in your family. So if you had a family of 4, that is probably 4 or 5 carrier bags worth of food. It's basic stuff, it's ambient, it's tinned, and it is packets. It's not a direct access project. You can't just rock up and say, I want some food. You have to be referred. This means that the assessment of need is done elsewhere instead of at the front door in front of my 140 volunteers who don't need the hassle and don't know whether someone is genuinely in need or not. We used to have paper vouchers for the first number of years, but in 2015 I worked very closely with Sarah Crawford in the council, and they gave us a grant and we developed a bespoke online referral system. And so we now have 1,973 online referral agents across the city from a huge range of services: social workers, health visitors, GPs, probation, advice agencies, schools, hostels, 48 different departments of Southampton City Council. As part of Paul's windfall in his grant he got, he's asked us to put together a food, health and hygiene toolkit, which we've done, and you can find that on the Love Southampton website. Next slide, thank you, Paulus. So we count the number of times that we feed people, and you can see the huge surge. in the COVID years, 2021, compared to a fairly steady emergency food provision otherwise up till then. And just like everybody else has said, during COVID, the silver lining of it, it was in some ways an incredible blessing just to see normal people across Southampton get together and help their neighbours. It was just amazing and a privilege to see streets of people organising themselves into collecting food and bringing it into the warehouse, or making sure that their neighbours were getting their prescriptions and things. And I think it was such a lesson for all of us about working together. And certainly in the kind of more organised food aid, we work together in ways that we never have before with all kinds of partners. That we got together the biggest food aid providers across the city, obviously the council, mutual aid groups, Love Southampton, huge numbers of volunteer drivers from the public. But crucially, the council's welfare teams, front end, and their comms teams to put together 3 distinct food distribution hubs across the city that took out food parcels across the whole of Southampton to people who couldn't get out to get their shopping themselves. And it was really successful, and just a massive example of how working together we were able to do something incredible that none of us on our own would have been able to do. Back to the bar chart. Thank you. You can see our projection for 2022. By the end of 2022, we're projecting a modest projection that we will have fed 2,500 people more than in the worst year of COVID. It's pretty bad out there at the moment. Our colleagues from the Anti-Poverty Network debt advice charities tell us that even when they get all their debt interest repayments cancelled, they're seeing an increasing number of people, they just can't budget balance their budgets. Their income in no way matches their outgoings. And the impact for us in food aid is that the Basics Banks and all the other excellent food projects in the city, food parcel deliveries we have, free hot meals, community larders, pantries, pay-as-you-feel cafes, all of us were set up as a safety net underneath the benefit system. We were set up to catch people when they fall into one of life's crises, to provide short-term help, to get people back on their feet, the unexpected costs, to give a breathing space to let the statutory services catch up with people's circumstances. We were not set up to be daily feeding centres like you would expect to see in a refugee camp or a disaster recovery zone. We want to be able to have our guests to come in, sit down, have a hot drink on a sofa, see a human face with warmth and compassion and empathy, maybe get some signposting to some of the other excellent, superb charities and services in the city. But at all of our venues, we're feeding over 100 people a day, and people are having to queue up outside, down the road, round the block, before they get anywhere near to seeing a friendly face. And you can imagine the impact that that has on people's self-respect and their level of hope. In my judgment, the food aid charities, the food aid network across the city is over capacity already. We have been struggling at City Mission with an empty warehouse for the last 3 or 4 months, which has never happened before. For a project that's set up to take food waste and excess food, which Sanjay will talk about, and give it away for free, we are having to spend several £100s a week buying food ourselves to give away. But I'll take 1 more minute to give you some good news. In the last 2 years, we developed a new type of project, which we call the Marketplace. It's based on the pantry model, and we now have 3, again, in areas of deprivation, the solid yellow dots. We've got one in St Mary's that's been going 18 months or more. We've got one up in Townhill Park at the community centre that Paul's Church runs, and we're over in Millbrook in the Millbrook Estate, which is really fantastic. So pleased with that one. And the 3 empty black circles are the 3 marketplaces we're expecting to roll out in the next 18 months, 2 years. Marketplaces and pantries are food membership clubs. They're not emergency food in the same way. You will not get a whole week's worth of food for everybody in your family. People do not have to be referred. Anybody can join, and we've actually seen a number of people across the income stream from and all different stratas choose to become members of these marketplaces. It works. Somebody pays after an interview and they become a member. They pay a £5 membership fee each week, and then they can select up to 15 items from freezers, from fridges, from fresh fruit and vegetables, and from ambient stuff. It won't it won't supply all of the needs for their family for the week. It will be a top-up. It will enable them to budget better, and it will enable them to access quality of food that they wouldn't be able to afford. It's a helping hand. It's not a handout. It feels very different. It's participation. It's not charity. And it has huge positive impacts in people's lives, the fact that they're not having to come cap in hand with nothing to offer. Each marketplace grows into a community hub, and it enables other projects and other initiatives to grow alongside them. It's leading to hugely beneficial outcomes. It's been incredible, really incredible, to have the university doing really good professional research and finding just so many positive outcomes in people's lives, in health, mental health, and all kinds of other things. So, as I said, our first marketplace was in St Mary's, and Sophie's going to tell you how good it's been.
Lovely. Thank you, Duncan. Yes, so I have the privilege of overseeing the St Mary's marketplace, and hopefully some pictures are going to come up of the marketplace to actually bring this a bit back now to the people. We've heard a lot about the statistics and how kind of quite intense that is and where we're at, but also this is people that we're talking about. These are individuals, these are our neighbours and our residents. And so I get the privilege of kind of sharing a bit about the marketplace, those that we're seeing coming in, and the positive impact as well. So as Duncan said, our marketplace started back in 2021 and has been running for about 18 months now, and we've really got to know some of the members that have come. And we are also absolutely blessed to have a range of partnerships that make it possible. As Duncan said, it has developed into a community hub. And so one thing I like to say is that our members come for the food, but they stay for the people there. That's through the partnerships of the people that we have, but also the amazing volunteer team that keeps it going each week and actually enables us to open our doors. There's many people in this room that we partner with from Southampton City Mission and the Big Difference next to me, but also from Love Southampton, Scratch, Saints Foundation, and more so SVS and So Linked as we grow. One of the most rewarding partnerships I do want to kind of touch upon is our one with the Southampton Central Primary Care Network, the social prescribers who are at the back in this room. You should give us a wave because they are amazing. There's a wider team, a few of them here today. If you've not connected with social prescribers, do find out. But one of the things that we find so important with this is because we are having members kind of come because of the hardship that they're facing, we don't want that to just be where they're staying. We want to see them progress. We want to see them grow. And having social prescribers there every week has enabled us to understand the hardships a bit more in detail, like why are members coming to the marketplace, or those who were previously on at Basics Bank or other food aid projects. And let's figure out how we can start to signpost, how we can seek advice and change that. Because we've had trusted relationships built with the volunteer team that come each week. And so members more and more did start to share their hardships because it was a space they felt safe. It was a space they felt welcomed. It was a space they belong in. And so growing that and having social prescribers in that team and other advice networks has enabled us to work with our members. So one story I'd love to share is about one of the families that come every week. And they say that they keep coming back because they know they're welcome, that the team care about how their lives are and ask how their kids are doing. They know that they can shop at the marketplace weekly, especially on those tough weeks. And actually that family's also found support through not only just community, but also through connections, being able to gain access to adult education and also help with a housing situation. There'll be some photos, hopefully. Another bit of that family is that the wife, who suffers from a lot of mental health, through the belonging that she's found and the encouragement of the community around her, she's also been able to find a bit more value in life, something that gets her out of bed. And she is part of the cooking team when we do like member banquets. So we bring food together and we eat together, just growing that community. So member feedback is incredibly valuable to us, particularly at the marketplace, to help us set up these like affiliated services and projects. And one of the reoccurring messages that we get in the feedback is how welcoming the space is and that members feel that they are supported. We made this possible actually through a creation of a larger cafe area where members gain access to hot, free drinks and also hot food by a pay what you can afford cafe. So again, come through different means, have different access of money. Pay what you can afford means they have access. There we go, there's some photos coming for you. And we also always have team present to chat. So not just the social subscribers, but also so that someone who's quite lonely. A couple of years ago, there was a recent study where it found 1 in 10 in the city of Southampton feel lonely. So actually to come to a space where they are listened to and can find friends similar to them, but also different, has a huge impact in them staying and feeling valued. There's actually some research that was done by the University of Oxford that revealed that the more people eat with others, the more likely they are to feel happy and satisfied with their lives. And that's something kind of we're seeing backed up by Diane's kind of initial new research at the marketplaces, where people are really commenting on the community they're finding and the want to come back. Another story to share about one of our members who has been coming to the marketplace pretty much since the start now. She hadn't left her house in 2 years before she came. And through the encouragement of a friend, she came to the marketplace because it was close by and they could access food to help her. She's registered disabled and can't work, so this became a bit of a lifeline for her. 18 months later, and she is now integrated into the core of the community on a Thursday. And we also get the benefit of her baked goods. She's an incredible baker, and she'll regularly bake for us, bring us cakes, also for the other members, and actually joined our church gardening team. This member and her friend both say they attribute the positive mentality change to the care they received by the marketplace team. They felt that they are valued and gained worth. And I'd love to share some more stories, but I am limited, so you can hopefully just see through the faces of the photos that were taken recently at the marketplace of just the kind of community and the sense of belonging that those of our members, but also visitors that they find. We are open to visitors. So when we opened up our cafe, we also opened up to visitors. So that's friends and family of the members, but also those who are just looking for somewhere to come on one morning that's warm and friendly and welcoming. They can gain access. So we do also have, in a way, referrals into the space just to come and sit and be. So I do believe that through provision, whilst it's, as we've heard, it's kind of bleak at the moment, it is also a massively important key to reducing loneliness and increasing kind of light satisfaction and comfort in our lives. And that's also coupled with welcoming and caring, supportive environments. So when we are faced with a new national crisis, one that isn't going to legally confine us to our houses, but actually driving people out of their houses in search of warmth, in search of somewhere brighter, somewhere where they can get something to eat and drink without having the eat or eat dilemma that we're hearing about. I believe that the food provision and services and community service are one of the solutions. And so at St Mary's, we have registered the marketplace as a warm space, part of the Warm Welcome network, and also working with SoLinked around connecting other warm spaces that are already talking about being a warm space, so that we can have a kind of wider network in the city to know who's willing to open. And I'm aware, as I said, that many in this room are thinking about being a warm space, or maybe have already set it up, or want to support warm spaces. And I'd just like to say, those who are considering setting up a warm space in the response to this crisis, or wanting to support a warm space in some capacity, think about the current services running. Think about what's near you. Think about what can be adapted to be a warm space. A warm space isn't just a warm space. It needs to be offering a warm welcome. It needs to be surrounded by honest and caring people that will value those who walk in, no matter where they've come from. Food and drink is important because it does bring people in, and we know that's a big issue right now. And also think about other things that could be on offer. One of the things we're looking at is free hot water bottle refills. So when someone leaves a warm space, they also get to leave warm with a hot water bottle as they head into the cold. So if you're considering, do come later to the session, or do come and find me and talk, as I'd love to kind of connect wider with those who are looking at this. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite here today. Everything's been said that I was going to say, so these are useless now. Never mind. I'm going to sort of talk about the positives and what we can do in terms of food to solve partly the food crisis. And to be honest, I've only got 2.5 years experience in this from COVID. I've got 15 years experience with the homeless sector, working with the council, partly street pastors and things like that. So if I just tell you the beginnings is the big breakfast at Above Bar Church, which has been running for 14 years, serving predominantly the homeless, that sector. That grew to about 100. It was a weekly breakfast every Thursday, so it's community, it's great, it's using food that we used to buy in. That kind of collapsed in COVID and went like everything else, and then the council and Paul Woodman and a few people came to us. There were people on the streets who were basically there by themselves. I've never seen the city like that in my life, where there was no one around, just the homeless. And we basically, together with the council, we served 55 of them in B&Bs across, I think it was 4 B&Bs, and fed them lunches 7 days a week through Love Southampton, who coordinated this response. They coordinated all the volunteers. Just need to remind you that the big breakfast, the big difference, we are all volunteers, including me. And I have to say, it's the volunteer sector that is superbly strong that came in during COVID. They were absolutely brilliant. I think the 4 groups that went out to do food provision, as Duncan's mentioned, were Big Difference, Southampton City Mission, St Mary's and the council, and they worked strongly together and partnered really well and really helped with that. What happened after that is that you've got to remember, in COVID it was bad, but there were more volunteers, there was more money, people were on furlough, there was generosity, it was good, it was bad, but it was good. But all the food started coming towards me at a rate that I just could not cope with, or we couldn't cope with, but luckily the minister at my church allowed me to destroy the church. So we had so much food coming in that we didn't know what to do with, but we did know what to do with, because Love Southampton coordinated this response together with the council, and we distributed that food wisely, and it was reaching people who couldn't get out. It was just a fantastic response. Sorry, that's a different PowerPoint going on behind. I'm just talking off the cuff now. So we did that, and So Big Breakfast finished and we became the Big Difference. So the Big Difference redistributes food that would go into landfill that gets to people that need it. Now, I believe we're the only people in the city doing that, and it is pretty massive. So the positives from this is that we are now networked and partnered with, to be honest, I've put down 50 people, but I think the partners are growing on that because people love it. The council are great as well. I have to commend them on giving us a building in Woolston, the old housing office, which actually is not big enough, but it's serving a purpose, and we've got a lot of food there. Sorry, I just have to work out what I'm saying now because it's all changed. So I talked about the partnerships. So we have this food, and it is going out at a rate that we can't cope. I think Mary, other people have mentioned stats, so I'm not going to talk about stats, but the national stats I can talk about. Basically, food. The need for food has gone up fourfold, and the amount of food has gone down twice. So it's a massive impact. But you know what? There is food out there. You just need to know what to do and how to get it. And it's all about talking to people, networking, and actually seeing the problem. So what people don't know how to do is, how do you deal with large quantities of short-dated food? Now that's Fair Share and other people like that. And they are good, but they're not, there's a lot of food, they can't even cope with it. So yes, I think Duncan said warehouses are empty. That problem of the really short-dated is difficult. So most people can deal with small amounts, but now we're getting into a place where we're taking pallets and pallets of short-dated food. And I think what I want to kind of highlight is, there's a lot of things I want to highlight, but I haven't got time to do it. Let's look at my notes. So I think with food, there are solutions, but you have to think outside the box. So people talk about best before dates and things like that, and you need to really understand it. And there's something about frozen food and extension wrap lives. And if you Google them, you can find, I'm not going to talk about it today, but there's ways of dealing with food. So the solutions that I've got are basically stronger partnerships, like with the council and other entities. There's a lot. They have been great because that building is fantastic. We've got 2 other sites, some really good donors in, Hamble. So I'm using their lockup for storage, and that's got food there that's dated 2025, 2026. So you'll be shocked to know that, yes, that there are tins that people throw away because they don't know how to do it. They don't know what to do. They've got storage issues. This is nationally everywhere. So people don't know what to do. So the easiest thing to do is to dump it. But there's a cost in that. There's a huge cost. But we're here and we can save on those costs. So those partnerships are growing. So I think looking at that, we're always looking to adapt and looking for solutions. We've just taken on KFC and Nando's. I know that's pretty unhealthy stuff and not the greatest, but the point is food waste and it's going in the bin. The newer partnerships that we're looking at the moment, and these are the really good ones, are with the farmers and outsource. So a lot of people don't know this, what happens, farmers have got all this food, misshaped peppers and stuff, and supermarkets won't take them. I think Waitrose are taking them now, but that all gets dumped, and there's pallets and pallets of it. So the issue is you need to have storage. Number one, you need to have a big warehouse, something big in the city centrally that can take that. I think one of the interesting things is because of that healthy fruit and veg option, it's great to be working with that. And one of the biggest things that would be really good, is, apart from the warehouse, is food sourcing. Now, there are experts who know how to source food for free, and there's lots and lots. I've got 3 minutes left. That's all right, that's not bad. There are, she said 2 minutes. But there are there is food available, and we can do it. And if you look at now how we've grown, we are actually serving probably, I put 85 communities. It's going over 100. But the number of people coming in and looking for food is going up. And every day there's emails and phone calls, can you help, can you help? And I think we can help, and we're trying to help as many people. But this sort of conference today, pulling people together, is an excellent way to network. And I've got a lot of questions for Dr. Diana, who actually put some really interesting stats up there, but actually she took half of my talk. So, and then, but yes, but all I can say is that there are positives, and it is about working together and pulling it together. So yeah, I'll thank you for listening, and any questions I'll answer afterwards.
Thank you. So after we've had our coffee break, we have some more speakers, but after lunch, when we've got the small groups, one of the things that we're really keen when we're talking about these partnerships is how we could better receive referrals and how we could better distribute. A lot of talk today about links with the council. We're quite interested with links with health, school nurses, district nurses. How can we assist you, and how can you assist us? Because we think we could, with better storage facilities, we could probably get more access to more food. But the problem with just volunteers is getting that food out. So how are we going to be able to distribute food more effectively? How are we going to be able to receive referrals more effectively? And how are we going to be able to work with you in partnership more effectively? Are the sorts of questions that we want you to wrestle with and come back to us with as with some solutions, if that's possible. Paul, it's coffee time now. Do you want to give some rules about that?
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. Let's give our speakers a round of applause. They did a fantastic job. We have got, you would have seen our team as you came in who are willing to help you if you've got any difficulties at all. And we've also got some student ambassadors that are helping us today. So if you need any help at all finding your way around the building, let us know. But we'll come back in 15 minutes, 11:22. We'll come back in for our second up. We'll be hearing from Liz Donegan, not to be missed, and from Tom Richardson at the university, second part. Do take a comfort break. There's some drinks hopefully out there for you, and we'll see you back 15 minutes. Thank you. we've got Natalie Webb joining us as well. So hand over to Liz. Thank you very much, Liz.
Well done, Liz.
You haven't heard it yet. Can you hear me?
You have to sort of...
I need to shout then. Okay. Oh, that's better.
Yeah, you just...
This is your first bog off for the day, Natalie and me. Is it buy one, get one free? Or twofer? Continuing the supermarket theme. I'm going to talk generically about advice services, but we felt it was important to highlight what's happening with children and young people. Okay, shall I get kicked off? As you know, I'm Liz Donegan, and we are one of the first sort of strong bundles of twigs. Advice in Southampton is, in that a lot of twigs or sticks came together, different shapes and sizes, strengths and objectives, all serving with one thing though, advice. And that happened about 6 years ago, and formed the Advice in Southampton Partnership. So those individual organisations that form part of that partnership have developed something which is really strong, which plays to strengths, as I've said, but serves people, so whatever front door they come through for advice, they get the advice they need, not the advice that just that organisation thinks they need. And we've developed our work over the period of time that we've been running this collaborative to widen that network. So part of our offer was to introduce a secure referral system between organisations, so a client could be seamlessly passported between agencies without falling down the cracks in the pavement, literally, which is what happens when they walk between our office and DWP, for example. And we now take referrals directly, electronically, in the same way that Duncan described earlier, through a network of agencies, which includes the So-Linked Community Navigators, Carers in Southampton, the City Council, and that free-flowing sharing between us enables us to wrap our services around the client, which we felt was really important. So I'm really happy to have been able to be part of this service development, which is all accredited, of course. So, here are the services that are involved. I'm Citizens Advice Southampton, as most of you will know. My colleague Natalie from No Limits, Age UK, and very important specialist provision in this city, which is incredibly diverse. So we work with Clear and EU Welcome, the Rose Road Association that provides specialist education, special educational needs and disability information and advice. The Environment Centre. We are so blessed in this city to have a great organisation completely dedicated to supporting the eradication of fuel poverty. And SARC, of course, who are a superb organisation with a wealth of expertise in welfare benefits and employment tribunal advice. And we are one of the very few cities, places in this country that have that sort of support. So I am going to focus on a bit of data, but I don't want to bore you with this too much, but it's just a snapshot, really, of what's been happening since the beginning of this year versus the beginning of last year. So overall, and this is focused on Citizens Advice, we've increased the number of clients that we help with so-called cost of living issues. So that's debt, housing, localised welfare support, etc., by 32% overall this year versus last. And it's really important to bear in mind that that's just up until the end of September, and we haven't even really hit a cold period or all of the pressures which have come on top in the last few weeks. So I'm quite worried about that, but it is what it is. I'm going to put this thing down because it's really hurting my hand, and remind me to explain what it is. Importantly, some areas are really shooting up with requests for advice. So Coxford, we've seen a 100% increase in clients accessing our service. Bitton, 76%. And I was noticing on that heat map how this is tracking the heat map that Mary was looking at earlier. And interestingly, in Bassett, our client numbers have nearly doubled. And this is only the people that we can help, because it's really hard to get through to us. I could have 15 advisors sat down every day, all day, answering the phone, and still not really reach into the number of people that need our support. So that's really difficult, knowing that. Really hard. But every volunteer that does help, every member of staff who works really hard, we're incredibly grateful to, and hopefully we can make a difference. Is this me or this microphone? I'm moving it. Okay. So, next slide. Let's go on. So, food bank referrals, 39% up. Increase in fuel debt, 39% up. Increase in council tax arrears, 38%. That's not a surprise, because that's the number of clients that we will ask questions when they request a food voucher, and nearly all of them will say they've got debts in those areas. And it was interesting to hear about the increase in pressure on housing. We're seeing 53% rise in rent arrears, and a lot of the problems with that feed into what happens next with those landlords. So they will then in turn increase their rents to recoup their money, put their deposit levels up, and all of those things put extra pressure on the housing market, and the 29% increased threat and homelessness. So our emerging themes, and I asked our partners for some of these. We always say to our clients, speak to your energy supplier. Well, if you're in trouble, that is. Well, if you're vulnerable and they don't recognise that you're vulnerable and need that support, that additional support, that can be a problem, and that's what we're seeing that's happening. We're also seeing people being pushed towards prepayment meters, which will in turn increase the cost of their energy supply. Cost of renting is increasing, as I said, particularly some of the barriers like being asked for 6 months deposit and even more. And we're hearing very much about the language of crisis and how that's impacting households. There's nothing like feeling really low about everything and then hearing about a crisis just to layer it all on top. And I know Natalie will talk more about that. We hear a lot about older people on fixed incomes, and they're making choices to stay in rather than go out and be social, so the effect that that has on their lives. And also we're seeing really badly informed choices. There's a real lack of information about how to look after yourself, how to manage your budgets. Thank you. And so that can lead in turn to people making really bad choices. So a family that will pay all of their bills really diligently with all of the money they've got and then have no food. And that's real, that's this week. And those sort of choices just don't make sense sometimes. And we haven't even seen the interest rates rise. So I'm going to move on quickly. What we're seeing, increased demand, increased complexity. So this week, a client who's a victim of domestic abuse has managed to move out, moved into a house, had been exploited by her landlord, both financially and sexually, which has created debt. And that's sort of every day at the moment, something like a combination like that. And that takes time and resources and further depletes the number of people we can help. And I'm going to say it because it's true, funding is rapidly falling behind costs. And that's got a real impact for organisations trying to support the city. And we all suffer the pressures on our workforces, and our volunteering is changed remarkably. But we are incredibly grateful to organisations like Solent University, who reach out and create very good partnerships with us that are mutually beneficial to students and to organisations like Citizens Advice. So we have creative solutions. Right, I'm going to finish now. I've got a case study, and the slides have got information about contact, about services. But thank you. Natalie?
Okay, thanks to Liz. So I'm Natalie, I'm Chief Exec at No Limits, who help children and young people in the city. And when I arrived today, Liz asked me if I would share some input focusing on children and young people. And I'm really pleased that she did, because I feel like so far there's not been much reflection about children and young people. And perhaps that's because when we're looking at food and we're looking at data, often that has an understandable adult focus. But I'll share some thoughts, and hopefully that's of interest. So, in Southampton, we already have a third of our children living in poverty. That's historic data. That's not with the cost of living. That's our starting point. Children and young people's mental health is a huge concern to all of us, I'm sure, and children and young people living in harmful homes. We have layers of a crisis. This isn't the only one. And this is being added on to homes. Homes where children haven't been born yet, homes where children are growing up and navigating naive childhood. We know that children and young people are facing lack of food, fuel, care, love, relationships, and then add on to that some of the children that are being supported, for example, through No Limits, like young carers. So this isn't an adult problem. If you're a young carer trying to support family, how do you navigate those food prices? How do you get to the pantry? You know, how do you as a child navigate this? And while Mary was talking, oh no, actually, I think it was Diana, I can't remember, but I had a quick squiz online, and the cost of nappies and baby wipes has gone up 60% in less than 3 months leading up to August this year. I just think that's really interesting, isn't it? And who is representing the voice of children and young people? How are we listening to them? They're living in homes where adults, carers, others are struggling. There may be substance use, there may be employment issues, and they may have their own concerns about how this crisis might be navigated on top of everything else in their already pretty much difficult lives, because childhood's tricky, right? And then there's younger people who face concerns about employment and their future. We know that young people are unfairly detrimentally affected, 0 hours contracts. We've heard about the housing market situation, the private rental sector. How are children going to afford to have a future? What might their future look like? Put yourself in the mind of a 15-year-old right now. What might that look like to them? And then I think about childhood from a sort of perspective of cost of living. What's the alternative to the cost of living? Dying? You know, where are we at with that? We're calling it the cost of living. Councillor Kaur said what keeps her up at night. I thought I'd share what keeps me up at night. In 2020, 2021, we had 238 serious safeguarding incidents at No Limits. The following year, that went from 238 to 622. In the first 3 months of this year, we had 211, so the projected increase for this year is 844. We had 244 children at risk of suicide, and for the first time ever, our statistics present under 5s. Before this year, the youngest child we'd helped was 9, and now we're recording data from 0 to 26. Now, we're there to serve those children and young people, but that should be worrying for us all. And of course, we need to think about the longer term impact as well. I read somewhere that it was 7 years after a big crisis like this that we still see the impacts happening and being lived out through our world and through our society. That's children not yet born. Mary described it as off the scale. I just wonder what this will look like in another few years' time and at what point we hit the swing. So what I thought was, I was scribbling all my notes down. I thought this all sounds very gloomy, and actually I think it's right that I share that because it is quite gloomy. But I also had an ask, and it was an ask, you know, we're all here in this room because we've got something that we're interested in with regards to this. And I would just ask everybody, when you go away from today or you're sitting there, to think about some commitment that could be made to children and young people in our city, either in the organisation that you work in the community that you live in, or however. And just to really tune in to what this means for the children that you see when you're walking down the street. Thank you.
There's a big picture of me. Let's quickly skip that. So, thank you very much for that. I really appreciate that. And my research is focused mainly on adults. But yeah, there was a huge impact on children and on families and certainly on parents. So, wait, let me just set my timer. Go. Right. So, I'm an associate professor at the University of Southampton. I'm a clinical psychologist, so I worked for 8 years in a community mental health team for adults. But I now work at the university teaching trainee psychologists and therapists, and one of my main research interests is about the link between financial and mental health problems. So I'm going to give you a quick overview about what the research says. I'm going to focus in particular about, as a psychologist, some of the psychological mechanisms that might link financial problems and mental health. I'm going to talk about some of the solutions I'm trying to work on, and I'm going to get some of my ideas for what we can all do together. So, got the references there for any academic, geeky inclined, such as myself. People from low socioeconomic status, so deprived households, low income backgrounds, etc., it's been shown for a while have increased risk of a range of different mental health problems, such as depression, anxiety, psychosis, etc. We know, unfortunately, that recessions, and you know, it was the news this week, wasn't it? The economy's dipped a little bit, not officially a recession yet, but it's forecast. That increases the risk of depression, anxiety, people who are struggling with drug and alcohol problems, and potentially people with suicidal behaviour such as self-harm. A study looking at 10 different European countries showed that socioeconomic deprivation, how deprived areas were, was linked to higher suicide rates. And we know that there are particular parts of the UK which are more deprived tend to have more admissions for self-harm and more psychiatric hospitalisations. There's another bigger issue here, which I don't have time to go in, and it is inherently political, but there is also the more unequal a country is, the worse its mental health is. The bigger the difference between rich and poor. And at the moment, it's going like that. And I did write a blog about this on the Thursday saying that the cut to the top income tax rate was going to mess up mental health. And then on the Monday, the government U-turned, so I'm going to take a little bit of credit for that. I'm sure Kwasi read it, you know. Anyway. A study looking at the entire adult population of Sweden recently showed that you're 2.5 times more likely to end your life by suicide if you're in debt. And that's after taking into account demographics, income, etc. Now, I don't want you to panic. That's a big number. We're still talking about a fraction of a percent. It's still a very small minority of people in debt who do take their own lives, but it is a big increase. Having to borrow money from informal sources, friends, family, loan sharks, and not surprisingly, cost of payday loans, having a utility disconnected, this is unfortunately particularly relevant, is also related to the risk of mental disorder. And people with mental health problems are 3 to 4 times more likely to have debt to energy companies, and that's before the current crisis. So I did a meta-analysis a few years ago where you pooled together statistically all of the research that has been done on the area. And the estimate I came up based on all this research, and this was from a range of different countries, etc., was that you're more than 3 times as likely to have a mental health problem if you're in debt. Now, there's the chicken and egg thing I'll say a little bit about. We're not really well, yeah, which comes first. But if you look at it, it's quite stark. So looking at one way, 9% of people who don't have a mental health problem are in debt, compared to a quarter who are in debt, again, before the current cost of living crisis where debt is going up. Looking at the other way, 42% of people in debt have a mental health problem compared to 18%. So this is big. And it holds for specific problems as well. For depression, it's more than double. For suicide or attempts or completion, people who take their own lives by suicide are nearly 9 times as likely to be in problem debt. Problem drinking, drug and alcohol problems, and psychosis, people with diagnosis such as schizophrenia. So there's a relationship for specific mental health problems as well. Now, I've done some research with students before, and they're feeling the cost of living crisis as well as all of us. But I think what I've done here is I tried to follow people up over time to answer that chicken and egg question, which comes first. And I think overall the research shows that financial problems lead to worsening mental health over time, but it does work both ways. So people who are struggling to pay the bills, they have worse depression, anxiety, drinking, psychotic symptoms, so hearing voices, etc., and a risk of eating disorders such as anorexia. That all worsened over time for those who were struggling to pay the bills. But it did, to an extent, work both ways, where it was also that people who had poorer mental health at time one, their finances also deteriorated. And for any of you working in this space, that probably makes sense, right? That it does people get into a vicious cycle where they can't pay the bills, they feel depressed, it's then harder to hold down a job, it's harder to get on top of the bills, and it just gets worse and worse. Some of you working in the sort of financial advice sphere, you might work with people with bipolar disorder. This is another one of my interests, and I have bipolar disorder myself, and a lot of people will impulsively spend when they are manic. And this is just a timeline we did for some research where we're mapping out how your mood changes and your spending interact over time. So people will overspend. It might be on shopping, it might be, we've had people who give 10 grand to charity, or they shower their loved ones with gifts they can't afford. And then their mood starts to crash, they realise what they've done, they feel anxious, and then they literally let the bills pile up and then chuck them in the bin. Might even get to a point where they're feeling suicidal. But then they can also comfort spend, buy yourself something nice to make yourself feel better. So there's often a mechanism that comes with this impulse spending, and it can dig people deeper. But again, we found that actually, if you follow people up over time, financial difficulties increase so people with bipolar disorder tend to have very high standards, goal focus. I'm going to, big ideas, I'm going to achieve, I'm going to set up a business. And so often actually they might be broke, and then they come up with a very impulsive plan to make money, and their mood increases and they're a bit more risky. And so sometimes they spend money to try and make money, an overly ambitious business idea which backfires. There's other research on the psychological links, which I'm interested in as a psychologist. And I'm not here, I don't want to come across as naive and say psychology is the only answer, because it's not. We all need to work together. And I'd much prefer it if people weren't in financial difficulty in the first place. But as a psychologist, I don't know anything about financial advice, and I can't take away people's debt. But maybe there's some stuff I can do to help people cope a little bit better, to mitigate that impact of financial problems on mental health. So there is a subjective element here. We know that how stressed people are about their finances is more important in terms of impact on depression than actually how much debt they're in. And you're probably £2,000 debt is not a big deal to some people. £200 debt is a huge deal to other people. Worry about whether your finances are going to get worse has a really big impact. So it's not just now, it's do I feel like my situation is going to worse. But there's positive things as well. We know that how much social support, and this is where there's probably lots of organisations in the room who can help with this, how much social support you have mitigates the impact of poverty on mental health. So we did this research a few years ago, and we were looking at these mechanisms. So there's objective financial hardship, not being able to pay the bills. And then there's subjective, which is how much you worry about it, how stressed you are about it. But then what actually turned financial problems into depression and anxiety and stress was hopelessness and shame. So it's not just how much you're struggling, it's how hopeful or hopeless you feel about the future. And I think this is really important for all of us. How ashamed you are was a really important factor as well. So if we can reduce how hopeless people feel, and if we can reduce how ashamed they feel, and no one should feel ashamed in the current context for not being able to feed their kids, that's going to be positive for people's mental health. We also found something that linked poor mental health and financial hardship was self-esteem, people feeling like they could cope, sense of agency, like they can do something about it, and active coping. So rather than burying your head in the sand, which we all do when we don't want to look at our bank balance at the end of the month, but it's even worse if you're depressed. Now this is hard in the current context where it feels like it's out of your hands, but anything we can do, such as citizens' advice or financial advice, no limits, etc., to help people feel a little bit more in control and like a bit more on top of it is going to be really positive. Now in terms of kind of interventions psychologically, there's not a lot out there. And I'm trying to change that. There's not a lot of research. There's a good project going on in Bristol where they've done a few evaluations called the HOPE Project. And what it's trying to do is it's trying to focus on men who are at risk of suicide. For example, they end up in hospital after taking an overdose, for example. And it's providing them with practical support around employment, around housing, and integrated, this is the key, integrated with some psychologically informed support around their mental health. So it's trying to do it all together, and I think that's one takeaway message, if you can. The more we work together, the better. We need to work together, right? So there's a massive overlap between the two. You can't work on one without the other. Now that's not the way services are set up, is there is a mental health service and there is financial advice services. But the more we can do to join that up, the better. Because or else people fall through the cracks, and you can't work on one without the other. Some of the stuff I'm doing, and this is kind of commercial stuff I'm doing outside of my university role, well, within my university role as well, we've got a psychological approach. So this is using a computer-based intervention, and it's trying to, this is 9 sessions online, and it is trying to tackle, using therapy, the link between money and mental health. So it's about reducing how much you're worrying about your finances, helping people face their financial fears, so ring their bank, ring the council rather than avoiding, trying to reduce impulse spending, trying to help people feel a little bit more hopeful and less ashamed about their situation. So for example, this is when people are depressed, a really good way to lift your mood is to get active, and this is trying to plan out your week but doing it on a budget, trying to plan in activities that are low cost or free. This is what we call a hierarchy, where you're facing your fears, you know, one step at a time. So people are trying to work their way up to face their fears, starting with gathering my bills, working up to going to see a debt advisor. So it's trying to really do an integrated here and help people access financial advice if they're depressed. I'm pleased to report it's actually being used nationally in a range of services. So IAPT, Increasing Access to Psychological Therapy, which is the main NHS therapy provider, employee support and some victim support as well. And we've done an initial pilot we published. We found that it was really helpful. It improved how depressed and anxious people felt. It reduced how distressed people were about their finances, and it improved how much people felt their finances impacted their mental health. I think I've already harassed you a little bit about this, but if anyone here works in the financial advice sector and wants to take part in a trial I'm applying for funding for, get in touch with me. There wouldn't be any cost to yourselves, but we want to see, we know this works in the NHS, we want to see whether this works in financial advice. So if this works integrated into debt advice work, the people go away, do this in their homework, and you take 5 minutes at the end of your financial advice section to say, how have you gotten with space and money worries? We really think that will help them get the most out of it, because actually a recent study showed, not surprisingly, people who were depressed don't do as well from financial advice and debt advice orders, etc. They bounce back. They end up having to go bankrupt, etc. Something I'm doing as well, which is again tech trying to help housing providers, councils, people who are very disengaged. They're behind on their rent arrears, but they're not picking up calls. They're not answering letters. We have an automated online assessment where people can fill in about their mental health and their vulnerability. They automatically get signposted to support, and they automatically get signposted to debt advice as well. And we found a lot of people immediately say, I want to try and get on top of my debt arrears, etc. So it's trying to reach out to people. So other ideas I've got, like I said, anything we can do to join up. I remember talking about a similar thing for student advice centres across the South Coast a few years ago, and the best outcome was, you know, the person who worked in student mental health service, wellbeing service, and the person who worked in student financial service just turned around and went, we should have a talk about how we work together. Yes, brilliant. Because or else people get referred to the crowd, okay? You know, they did a trial where they tried to give people who were depressed a leaflet for ring this person about debt advice, and no one did it. And we need to work closer. You know, it's very hard when you're depressed to motivate yourself. If you've actually got a financial advice, you know, advisor in a mental health team, you're much more likely to talk to that person than ring this number. So the closer we work together, the better. I really would like to see a public health campaign around finances and mental health to try and normalise, to try and destigmatise and reduce how ashamed people feel and increase. You know, so that's really going to help normalise, that's going to tackle the shame, but it's also going to help people reach out. So please, very willing to get in touch, any kind of ideas we have about how we can work together. Diana was talking earlier, we are hopefully got some funding to do a local bit of research, across Hampshire actually, about trying to map out the impacts of the cost of living crisis on mental health. So watch this space. We might be in touch with you about trying to get some data about the kind of stuff we've been presenting there about how much your services has increased. Finally, a bit of a plug. If you want to take part in my research, it's confidential. Any adult, anywhere in the world can take part. So do please share. This is about anyone, regardless of their financial or mental health situation. We're trying to understand the role of how kind you are to yourself, self-compassion, and whether that has an impact on poverty and mental health links. So do please take part if you can. And I think that's me. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to say thanks, Tom, but I'm not taking over here much. Quick plug, we've got a questionnaire that I want to hand out about digital barriers to using digital, and I will hand those back, but if they could be put back, oh, Kirsty's holding them up there, thanks Kirsty, and put in the orange box. And just to, on a funny note, if I can, Paul asked me to make a health and safety announcement. Could you please not use this as a mouth spray? Well, I thought it was a mouth spray. It's a hand sanitizer. This is in your pack, so not mouth spray. Sanitizer. Thank you.
Thanks, Liv. Thanks, team. Yeah, and Advice in Southampton is an amazing network, and they do a lot of work day by day with hundreds of people. So, yeah, great work, and thanks for representing it all so well today. And thank you, Tom. Really enjoyed. I learned lots through your presentation, so thank you so much for contributing. We're going to hear from Simon Thomas now and the team that he's got. Good news, though, just to cheer you up with your well-being. We have got a new coffee station available for when you go back outside, so it'll be a bit quicker. And if you have an allergy when we go out for lunch, which is just a few minutes away, then on the right-hand side as you go out, there's a table for you if you have any allergies or so on. And we might try and get a photo as well, not just yet, but we've got Simon first. But when we go out for lunch, we might get one quick photo with our photographer, Esther. Give Esther a round of applause. And Simon, come. The good thing is no one's actually had an argument yet that I know of, so we're doing quite well, Simon. But explain to us your plan for this afternoon and how we turn this good things that we've heard into action.
Okay, that's easy, isn't it? when you've heard all you've heard. That was brilliant, by the way. Thomas, fantastic. You've just stolen 3 of my points, so that's fine. When we break out after lunch, you need to absolutely be on full connection, right? In your heads, your hearts, your minds. There is so much information you've heard. There are so many incredible things that are going on in this city. It's absolutely fantastic. If the facilitators can just stand up where they are, just so people know they are real people, they're not AI, artificial intelligence, there you go. These guys will be in your rooms with you. They're not there to tell you any answers. They're not there to give you the kind of clues, the 7 keys to the 6 doors to the 3 foundations. They are there simply to facilitate your hearts and minds in discussion. And they're really very, very good at doing that. I'm going to big them up because they come from all sorts of sectors. But I think what Thomas said so clearly there, and I think it's a really important thing to remember, even though you will be in one particular facilitation group, so it might be finance, it might be fuel poverty, it might be mental health, you have to bear in mind in your discussion all the other sectors. And as rightly been pointed out in this last particular talk, they do all interrelate. If we crack an element of finance and financial stability, then we've cracked an area of food sustainability, then we've cracked an area of mental health, then we've cracked an area of maybe saving things in the houses and places that we live, etc., etc. Just to also remember, yes, there are 8 groups here, not 5 or 1, 2, 6, 4, 8 on your program. There are 8 groups, and each subject is repeated twice. And we're trying to bring it to a place with the facilitators where you come out with 2 or 3 outcomes and some possible pledges as well that go with that. The idea of pledges is not just suddenly to get excited because you're in a day and you want to solve problems, just say, I'll do that, but to really think very carefully, say there's a missing element to how this all interlinks. Maybe I've got a solution here. Maybe I know somewhere or someone or something within the city and the complexity of all the angles of it that I can pledge something into the middle of that. Last time I remember with Paul on the beds and begging, I think the business sector just pledged £1 million, was it, on the spot or something like that? Not enough. That was the exaggeration that they said anyway. But they just pledged some money because they knew that there was a homeless problem. They knew that things were going on, but obviously it was disrupting their businesses, but they wanted to be involved. And it's something like that that we need to be seeing happening here. Remember also, there's several levels to economies. This will be very helpful in the Treasury this afternoon. But there are several levels. There's a global economy, there's a national economy, there's a local economy, there's a neighbourhood economy, and there's an economy, which is the economy of friendships and relationships and people working together. So sometimes you wonder how countries work. How do they work? It doesn't seem to work out. Everybody earns no income, and yet there seems to be a very high level of income, and yet the reality is very different to what it's purported in the statistics. So statistics are very useful and helpful to see a picture. Remember that the economies that we live in and the lives that we live in and the financial systems we live in are changeable and workable. Now, I worked with a group in Lewisham in South East London for years, and they did a no finance economy system by pledging gifts, ideas, time, time banks. You've heard of it all many, many, many times. But actually, it did create something where Lewisham Council came at one stage and said, do you think we can run Lewisham without any money? Because we haven't got any anyway. So it'd be really helpful if we could. But those sorts of creative ideas are what we need to do. Sanjay said it really well. We need to think outside of the box. We really do need to think outside of the box. I work in the housing sector, community sector, and the education sector. I'm the CEO of a housing association. At this moment in time, it's absolutely terrifying in that sector. We can't build things, we can't house people, nobody can afford to live even in social housing, yet alone in private rented sectors. So I'm in a sector that's really pressurised, really demanding. But one of the things we are absolutely committed to is because it has been done like this, it doesn't have to be done like that in the future. Because we seem to have a pattern where things have got into, particularly in the construction industry, it doesn't have to progress like that into the future. So we need to have that kind of thinking into our midst. And let me pick up another one that Thomas said, hope building. hope is not just an amorphous term that just says, let's just feel good today. I'm glad you're up at night as well. Councillor Carl, I think we're all up at night at the moment. Let's not just feel. Hope is based on the substance of things changing because the future can look better than it is at the moment. So when we're hope building, we're saying we've got some places, solutions, some possibilities, not just great stories, but possibilities by working together, by collaborating, by creating new scenarios that actually can look better even in a tremendous crisis that we're facing at the moment. So let's keep all those things in mind, and also dependence. We are and have become very dependent people in our culture in the UK. And I travel a lot globally and working with very vulnerable situations in countries around the world. And our dependence on a sort of national framework and even an international global system that just works and it happens and it arrives at our doorstep is something we've got used to in the UK. And I think we need to shift away from it a little bit. And this localism that you've been talking about today, and this incredible resource in this room now, is absolutely where we need to go. It's not to diss all the things that go on in the economic systems. It's not to diss all the things that are happening probably this afternoon at Number 10 and a number of other places. But it's to say that actually the resource in the room, in the street, in the neighbourhood, as we saw so strongly in COVID, didn't we, is really there. And I'm very, very excited of what might come out later in these particular sessions. Paul.
Simon, yeah, amazing. It was genuinely one of the best conversations I had this year was when I said, Simon, would you help us? And he said, yes. We're like, yes. So really pleased, Simon, and your team I know are fantastic. Inside your little speaker bio things, there's a description of each of them. You'll see they're a team with lots of different skills and experiences to bring to the groups. So here we are, after lunch, groups 1 and 2 going to be back in here, upstairs, downstairs, coming together. And then groups 3 and 4 are going to be where we have lunch. And then the other groups, there's side rooms, which the student ambassadors will help you find, but there's a little corridor with the little breakout rooms coming through there. Nice breakout rooms, nice in here, nice in the atrium. So we've lost a bit of time for lunch, but it's a free lunch, so enjoy. And we're back into breakout rooms at 1 o'clock.
I missed
Thank you very much.
How do we know what room we're going to? There. No, how do I know what room I'm going to?